Is atheism more rational than God? Well, yes, since one demonstrably exists, and the other does not, so that much is obvious. But when a theist wants to pretend that he's got us all figured out, but he gets absolutely everything wrong, are we really surprised? At all? Of course not. Let's go watch the insanity. Today, we're looking at a channel called What Would You Say? Well, personally, I'd say you're out of your mind, but I really don't think that's what you were looking for. I'm assuming that it's put together by something called the Colson Center, at least that's what they have in the corner of the video, and that's the group formerly run by Chuck Colson, which is, no surprise, trying to con people into giving them money so they can be trained to unleash this ridiculous religious lunacy onto other people. You know, kind of like STR. But are they any better? Yeah. Don't hold your breath.
You're in a conversation and someone tells you that they don't believe in God because they're rational. And rational people only believe things that are supported by evidence. What would you say?
Which is entirely true. Now, I'm sure that this is going to go down a very absurd rabbit hole to try to prove that being rational isn't rational. No, they want you to be an emotional mess because that's the only way to get anywhere remotely close to their ridiculous religious beliefs. So I'll predict right now, and remember, I haven't actually seen the video as I write this, that they'll point out some bizarre instance of non-rational ideas and pretend that that means that rationality is entirely overrated. Let's see if I'm right.
Atheism is the belief that there is no God.
No, it's not. It is the lack of belief that there is. It is the rejection of unsupported claims made by the religious for lack of corroboratory evidence. If you can't even get that right, I don't know what to tell you. But of course, they don't care. The facts are inconvenient to your narrative, so you just ignore them. Hey, what else is new?
One common atheistic critique of religious faith is that it requires belief in something that can't be proven scientifically.
Or in any other way. It is made up of unsupported claims which cannot be validated objectively, but which require blind faith to accept as true. The reason we do this is because there's no way to differentiate between unsupported claims to determine which ones, if any, hold any intellectual merit. The claim that God is real is really no different than the claim that leprechauns are real. Those who derive emotional comfort from those beliefs both hold equivalent conviction that those beliefs are true. Now, how do we determine objectively which of them, if either of them, actually is? We can't. Faith doesn't actually demonstrate anything but your own gullibility.
Is it true that atheists only believe things that science can prove?
No, but then again, this is just a giant straw man. He's just going to beat on it for a while, proving nothing but his own stupidity, and then pretend that makes atheists wrong. But I'm willing to bet that every single one of his examples, at least in my case, if applicable at all, aren't rationally held, or are absurd straw men. I'm just making predictions all over the place today, but I've seen this kind of thing so many times, it's pretty hard not to. Nothing ever changes for the religious. So let's watch him make a fool of himself.
No. And here are 3 reasons why. First, atheism requires us to believe that something came from nothing.
Atheism doesn't require anything at all. Atheism isn't a belief. It has no positions. It has no tenets. It makes no claims of any kind. Atheism is one and only one thing that I've already described. It is the rejection of the irrational and unsupported claims made by the religious. That's it. But as I've also said a lot, the religious seem convinced that everyone is just like they are. And they're wrong. The religious desperately want to draw parallels between their own blind faith and the faith that they imagine everyone else has to have, because that's the only way they know to look at the world. If others have faith, then their own faith is justified, so they insist that everyone has faith so they don't have to look so ridiculous. It's blatant dishonesty and ignorance on their part. Hey, what else is new?
Science tells us that something can't appear out of nothing.
Science says nothing of the sort. And in fact, we know that quarks do that all the time. So that's just a lie, or you just don't know what the hell you're talking about. Pick one. On the quantum level, weird things happen constantly. But when you're terrified of education, as the religious tend to be, it's no wonder that they don't know that, or they don't care. They just make stuff up in their apologetics videos in a desperate attempt to discredit the opposition, without having the slightest clue what the opposition is actually saying or why. Dishonesty and ignorance. It's what they do.
Matter can't suddenly appear out of a void. But galaxies, stars, planets, people, and animals exist. Everything we see came from somewhere.
Yes, it did. We just don't know where because we do not, at present, have any evidence upon which to draw a conclusion. Therefore, our answer, the only rational answer you can have is, we don't know, but we're still looking. Your answer, on the other hand, is, we just made up a god because it makes us feel good and everyone ought to stop looking because it hurts our precious little fee-fees. Yeah, I think I'll stick with the science if you don't mind. I'm not stupid enough to go with your asinine ideas.
Atheists know that there was a beginning of the universe, but they deny that it was created.
We know that there was a beginning to our universe. We deny it was created because there's no evidence that it was. You've actually got to find evidence for any of this nonsense. This is just your religious ignorance talking. They're not following the available evidence to the most rationally derived conclusion. They're following their feelings to any conclusion which provides emotional comfort. Whenever science proves their ideas wrong, as happens constantly, they just change their ideas and keep proclaiming superiority. I'm sorry, that's just not impressing anyone.
As a result, they are forced to claim that, at some point in the distant past, everything we see came from nothing.
And no one but you ever claims that. Again, dishonesty or ignorance. Either they don't know any better, which I guess is entirely possible, or they do know better and they're just lying about it. Because nothing this guy is saying is even remotely true. He's operating on less than a high school understanding of cosmology. This isn't atheist rejecting rationality. It's a theist, as is no surprise, lying about it. Like I keep saying, what else is new?
Not only is there no evidence to support this belief, everything we know from science tells us that's not possible.
The belief that doesn't actually exist, you mean? The claim that you're just making up, you mean? But because this is all just one giant straw man, your conclusions are ridiculous as well. I don't think you have a clue what science actually says. I'd suggest you do some research, but come on, he doesn't care about the reality. He's too busy pushing an intellectually empty narrative.
Second, atheism requires us to believe that life came from non-life.
Again, atheism doesn't require anything because atheism has no beliefs. Science requires you to believe that, I guess if you can define it that way, but science and atheism are not the same thing. I honestly shouldn't have to explain this.
Science also teaches us that something living can only come from something else that was living.
No, it doesn't. And again, you keep talking about science as though science and atheism are identical. They're not. Knock it off. But regardless, we've known for a long time that amino acids, the basis of all living things, can and do arise from non-living sources. Now, this is an old source, but some of the original research was done back in the 1970s by Dr. Sidney Fox. I'll leave a link in the description. And science has also, just recently, built bacteria in the lab from entirely custom DNA. We created it. That story is below as well. You're just wrong.
A new tree can only come from a tree that is alive, in the same way that a new cell can only come from an organism that is alive.
That's just not true anymore. I guess you people are going to have to change your rhetoric, or, more likely, you're just going to keep lying to your ignorant congregations. After all, these videos aren't being made to challenge atheists, they're being made to comfort theists. This thing only exists because someone wants to reassure other believers that their beliefs are still worthwhile by lying about atheists and science and figuring their ignorant followers simply won't know any better.
Now, atheists acknowledge life exists, but by denying a creator, they are required to believe that at some point in the distant past, a living thing came from something that wasn't living.
Again, this has nothing at all to do with atheists, but yes, I will agree, science does say that, and can demonstrate it, and now can replicate it in the lab. That has nothing at all to do with atheism though, but this guy has no clue what atheism is, so what do you expect?
This has never been observed.
Except for all the times it has, of course. Except for all of the experimental data, of course. Except for us making it happen, of course. But honesty and all that.
And everything we know about science tells us it's not possible. Yet they believe it because their belief that there is no God requires them to.
No, at least speaking personally, I believe it because that's what every bit of experimental data points to. And when that experimental data is put into practice and we prove it works in a lab setting, yeah, I'm going to accept that over your silly, unsupported, emotionally coddling nonsense. If the data changes, if we learn more that invalidates this, I'll change my mind. Until then, though, this is the best we have. And you have absolutely nothing.
Third, atheism gives you no reason to trust your reasoning process.
That really has nothing to do with your other 2 points, you notice? His entire premise is that atheists have some kind of faith or belief, but this one, it's not about that. So he doesn't really have 3 examples, I guess. Then why make a video claiming that you do? That's really kind of stupid. But by all means, go on. I mean, I haven't rolled my eyes in nearly 30 seconds. I might as well get back to that.
Now, we trust our brains to engage in reason and logic.
No, not really. Because we know that our brains are fallible and prone to seeing things that aren't really there. That's the whole basis of the scientific methodology. We don't just believe for no reason that absolutely everything in our brains must be rational and intellectual. That's why we test things. I mean, look at religion. That's evidence right there that it isn't true. So again, we're looking at blatant ignorance and dishonesty being displayed on the screen. Keep going though, I need a laugh.
And we use reason and logic to form opinions and beliefs.
Not necessarily. I mean, we should if people were inherently rational, but most people simply are not. That's why so many people are religious, because they're not using logic or reason to examine the world around them and come to the most coherent and evidence-based conclusions. Being reasonable and logical and skeptical, which is another very important characteristic, those things require effort. Something that religion and its emotionally comforting wishful thinking simply do not.
But ask yourself this. If your brain is the result of an evolutionary process rather than design, what reason is there to believe that your brain is capable of performing the task you have given it?
Your brain is not given a task. What would demonstrably do so? Our brains arose as they did through evolutionary pressures, producing people who were best suited for their particular ecological niche at the time. There is no relentless advancement towards some kind of idealized perfection. I know the religious would like to believe that, but that simply isn't the case. Our brains are the way that they are because it helped our ancestors to survive and reproduce. Those that didn't survive and reproduce didn't pass down their genes and are no longer represented in the modern genome. This is a bizarre idea that I find very common among the religious. How is it that you get this so entirely wrong so often?
For all you know, your brain is still 10 million years from being fully functional and rationally reliable.
There's really no such thing as fully functional. See what I mean about the march toward perfection? How these people can be so far out in the weeds, I really don't understand. You have to work with what you have. If you're building a house and you don't have a pneumatic nail gun, then you have to use a hammer. That doesn't mean that you can't get the job done because your nailing isn't fully functional. What an idiot.
Atheism not only requires irrational beliefs, like life came from non-life, it also destroys the reason to believe anything is rational by undermining the credibility of our minds, the tool we use to reason.
Atheism, no matter how many times you repeat that, still requires nothing. He's still running around with a false conception of reality, which, let's be honest, is no surprise at all. I mean, look at what he believes. And yes, religion actually requires beliefs, unlike atheism. Because we're not like you are. We are not just another kind of religion. The fact that you can't tell the difference between the two, that's pretty pathetic.
And regardless of your belief system, there are difficult questions that the limits of human knowledge don't have great answers for.
And if you believe the religious, the solution to that is to just make something up. Because that's really everything that religion is based on. Making up emotionally comforting nonsense, or buying into the emotionally comforting nonsense that someone else made up, because it's a lot easier and less scary than actually dealing with the real world the way it is. That's the core of religion, and always has been. And when you've bought into this load of nonsense hook, line, and sinker, it becomes part of your self-concept, to the point that you cannot deny it without denying yourself. And that's why you keep seeing theists lying and deceiving in a desperate attempt to maintain their blind faith. And for some reason, this is supposed to be preferable. Go figure.
But the next time someone tells you that faith in God is irrational, but atheism is rational, remember these three things.
Those three things that I already dismantled and showed were utterly ridiculous, you mean, right? Please, remember those three things and how absolutely idiotic they are. Maybe, just maybe, you'll make less of a fool of yourself than this jackass did.
Atheism requires us to believe that something came from nothing.
After that, he just goes into a recap, which I'll just skip because we've already seen it. In retrospect, I pretty much called it. Now, granted, I thought he'd do a little better than he did, But it was the typical, here's what atheists are, without having the slightest idea what atheists are, strawman nonsense. It's what a lot of these religious shysters pull, because they are convinced that that's the way we are, mostly because they're terrified to actually talk to us. In person, with a real atheist. This guy would have gotten shredded, and rightfully so. I'm honestly surprised that he's got his comments turned on, and a lot of people are just making fun of him. You've got a couple of sheep, and a lot of people going, are you nuts? Well, yes he is. But that's hardly a surprise, and he's hardly alone. That's why it's important for people to keep pointing out all of the errors and the lies that these people make. Otherwise, their videos go unchallenged, and people are going to believe that there are no answers. No, the ones with no answers are the religious. They're the ones being dishonest and ignorant. The more people that realize that, the better. So let's make sure we all spread the word, one video at a time, okay? The more people see this, the less will hopefully believe. And wouldn't that be a great thing?
Boom, dicky, 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 boom.